Joining me in the studio now is Joe Escobedo, who is the Chief Content Officer to Fortune 1000 companies, a internet sensation, a conference speaker, and of course, very successful in your consulting business as well. Joe, you help to educate and empower marketers by giving them practical marketing tips and sales tips through consulting and training. Tell me a little bit more about your business. What does it center around?
Sure. So I think the common theme around everything I do is education. So as you mentioned, my goal is to educate and empower as many marketing and sales professionals as possible. And I think one thing that makes my business or what I do slightly different is that it's very much practical advice, meaning that I don't really do theory. It's very much what I've learned, what my clients have learned, and then sharing how they can apply that to their organization.
Well, I think most people want that anyway, right? They want something that's going to actually affect positively their bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's been a lot of the demand recently.
In your work across ASEAN, I know you're working on a book right now about your experiences and your thoughts on the topic. But do you see differences in the markets across ASEAN in the way that companies or even entrepreneurs, SMEs, would approach their marketing philosophy?
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. I think you see a lot of difference in terms of the maturity of markets. Obviously, I do a lot of work around Southeast Asia, and so markets like Malaysia and Indonesia, you see a strong growth there. So for them, the education piece is huge because a lot of them are starting from that foundational piece. Whereas in Singapore, they already have kind of the foundations in place. They kind of know the basics of marketing and so on. And so it's just about taking them to that next level in terms of their education.
Yeah, the notion of thought leadership development is a popular one these days, has been for a number of years now. People, of course, reaching out on their LinkedIn profiles, and we heard about that from Chris Reed from Black Marketing here a couple weeks ago on MoneyFM. But when you talk to them about establishing themselves as thought leaders, what do you suggest? And let's look specifically more at kind of the SMEs and the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's extremely applicable to the SMEs and entrepreneurs because they are essentially the face of the organization. So it really requires them to build a strong personal brand and thought leadership. So the first question I always should ask yourself is, what do I want to be known for? So with that said, knowing that question, you can develop the right content and add the right value to your audience. But first, you have to answer that question.
Yeah.
So to give an example, I was given the nickname the Brand Builder.
Okay.
So that was given to me by a former colleague, and it's just kind of stuck. It's who I am. It's how I brand myself. And people actually know me more as that than my actual name, which is quite an interesting kind of phenomenon.
And you have that on your LinkedIn profile
I do have that on my LinkedIn profile, and yes, I include it in my conference bios as well. But to answer that question for many entrepreneurs and CEOs, I would say there's a great Japanese framework that's been around forever. It's called Ikigai. And so the framework suggests that you essentially ask yourself 4 questions. The first question is, what do I love doing? The second is, what am I good at? The third is, what can I be paid for? That's pretty important. And the fourth is, what does the world actually need? And by answering those 4 questions, you can see an overlap in terms of the answers. And that essentially is supposed to help you drive your path in terms of what you want to be known for and how you want to position yourself. Doesn't
this sort of get back to that early 1970s idea of the job to be done, right? You don't want to buy a drill. You actually want to buy a hole in the wall. And so people need to think about what it is they can do, what it is they can offer, not just maybe the spin they want to put on who they are, but what their actual value is to customers. Is that sort of right?
Absolutely. That is one thing that I constantly preach in terms of everything I do, is being able to constantly add value to your audience.
Yep.
Now, for me, that is sharing my advice, my successes, my failures, what worked. So constantly sharing practical advice. But for other people, it could be, entertaining people to their own kind of unique personality. But something that constantly is adding value to your audience is what's going to help you build your audience over the long term.
Joe Escobedo, the Chief Content Officer for many Fortune 1000 companies, having some inspiring interview moments here with Joe. Joe, as people look to establish their marketing strategy, what's the best way to do it? If they want to try to do it on their own, you mentioned looking at their individual talents and strengths, but it has to go deeper than that, right? To put together a unified strategy across their communication platforms, their social platforms, whatever. How does somebody go about tackling that?
So for me, I always take an audience-first approach. Now, this seems like very common sense, but I would say the majority of the companies I work with initially, they are constantly producing content just for the sake of it. And when I ask them, who is this targeted for? Or what's the impact it's going to have on the business? many of them have very difficulty answering that question. So I always say, okay, start with who is your audience, what are they going to find valuable, and how does that fit into your products and services?
Right.
Only when you understand that piece of the puzzle can you put together a holistic strategy.
And then once they've figured that out, what's the next step? Okay, I want to be known as the communicator, the brand builder, the whatever. They've got a lot of different pieces that have to come together, right? I mean, to put the brand and marketing strategy together. What would be a next step? How would they then take it to the next level?
Sure. So for me, it's about constantly experimenting. So putting out content, seeing what works, what doesn't work, get feedback from your audience. That's a big thing that I do is I constantly ask feedback and say, okay, what kind of topics would you be interested in learning more about? Or even getting their feedback on kind of stuff I'm working on such that I'm able to tweak my strategy on an ongoing basis. I think it's a big misconception about strategies that you put it in place and then it just stays there.
Right.
But for me, my strategy is constantly evolving and changing as I get feedback from the market and my prospects.
And how do you reach out? What channels, what way do you reach out to your crowd?
So I'm quite big, as you can see, on LinkedIn. So I'm constantly polling them, asking questions. I've created a newsletter recently. And so that is an excellent way in which to drive kind of those dialogues behind the scenes because people are more forthcoming via email than they are in public. So those are two big channels that I use to collect a lot of feedback. And then also the workshops and trainings I do. I'm constantly polling people, finding out, what are your biggest challenges? How can I help? So I collect all that information, and essentially that forms the basis of how I form my marketing strategies.
Interesting. Many times we see founders are generally the main figure in an SME or even in some larger companies as well, some MNCs, and they don't often want to let go of being the one who is out there leading the marketing strategy, the marketing conversation. Is it necessary for them to let go? And if so, what's the value of that and how would they do that?
Okay. So that's an excellent question. I think, first off, when you're starting the business, the founder or CEO should be the face of the organization. Now, the reason for that is they should be setting an example for the others. So if they are establishing a strong personal brand and thought leadership for themselves, it's in turn going to help the organization. But at the same time, they want to be empowering the other team members to do the same. Now, the reason for that is as the organization grows, as a CEO, as a founder, you're not going to be able to do everything.
Yeah.
So you want to start delegating some of the work. So things that often come up to CEOs or founders is like media opportunities or interviews and so on. And it takes up a lot of time, scheduling those, preparing for those. So if you have team members who have already built up a strong personal brand and are able to take over some of those responsibilities, as a founder, you have more opportunity to look at things from a holistic, strategic point of view.
Look at the bigger picture.
Look at the bigger picture, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. As you think about 2019, it's off to a roaring start for many companies, many businesses. Of course, people are concerned about what's happening with the world economy and trade wars and everything. When you think about marketing in 2019, are there any key tips or strategies or ideas that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I actually got interviewed recently to find out my predictions for 2019.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And so for me, I see a large focus in terms of video. Now, the reason for that is, let's use LinkedIn as an example.
Sure.
They are strongly pushing video in addition to kind of their platforms and products as well.
Right.
Because they want people to stay engaged on the platform itself. So things like native videos is something I've been experimenting with. And it's got tremendous kind of results in terms of the engagement, in terms of the reach, in terms of the profile views. It's been a kind of a next level because I am a writer. So I've just started putting out videos, and the reaction I've gotten from people all over the world is incredible.
What topics or what content do you usually put on those videos?
So it's very much the key content pillars I talk about all the time. So content marketing, social selling, and personal branding. So the reason for that is when you're coming up with your themes, you don't want to be known for everything. So you want to focus on maybe 2 to 3 topics that you're always talking about in every social post, every workshop, everything you do.
Okay.
And so those are my 3.
Awesome. Anything else to add on that? I didn't want to cut you off.
No. So, yeah. So for me, once again, it's about I'm constantly sharing my experiments. What works, what doesn't work, new tools I've found, tips that I've used to kind of grow my business and my clients' business. So I share all of those freely with the public.
Awesome. Joe, how can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Joe Escobedo, the brand builder. It's usually the best place to start. Connect with me there. I'm happy to start the conversation with you and essentially find out how I can help you.
Awesome. Joe Escobedo, Chief Content Officer to many companies, a trainer, a consultant, a coach. Thanks very much for being with us on Money FM today.
All right. Thank you so much, Glenn. Appreciate it.